It all starts at the mansion of our protagonist, a boy named Yuri, who is letting go of his employees because his fortune isn't as great as he thought, and he can't afford to pay the salaries of the mansion's servants. However, he plans to keep his parents' grand mansion at all costs, doing it all by himself. Let's remember that our protagonist lost his parents and now has to become an independent adult while still being just a kid. So, being so young, household chores are quite a complicated problem for him, as he finds it impossible to cook something tasty, wash his clothes, or even vacuum the dust in the house. He settles for instant noodles for lunch. After eating, he strolls around the mansion and meets a woman dressed as a maid. Yuri suspects she might be a thief since she appeared unannounced. With no one else around, she offers her maid services for free, just for experience. Yuri is suspicious but agrees since he's hungry, and it's a good deal. The maid, Lilith, excels in her duties, cooking well, keeping everything clean, and making clothes soft. Yuri still finds the offer rather suspicious, but since he's hungry and the offer is too good to pass up, he decides to hire her in exchange for practically thanks. This is how the girl called Lilith would begin her duties as a maid, being someone excellent in every way. She cooks well, leaves everything impeccable, and leaves the clothes as soft as mom. Everything is perfect thanks to Lilith, maybe too perfect, and that's why our protagonist starts to suspect that there's something quite off about her, because no one can do things so perfectly. So, he begins to spy on her to see if he can figure out her routine or her way of being, which is pretty strange, but he doesn't discover anything because she's also good at hiding it. However, when he confronts her, he does tell her that she's quite a beauty, and that he thinks about her every night. Since he couldn't find anything incriminating about her behavior or actions, he deduces that she might be a witch or some kind of sorceress, which is why he decides to confront her once again to judge her. Lily Lee plays along by saying that it's all based on her magic, which is performed thanks to her beautiful eyes. Yuri, being an innocent kid, would think this is 100% real, no fake, because it all makes sense. Someone so beautiful with such gorgeous eyes must have something magical about her, which makes the girl leave embarrassed. It's worth mentioning that she really doesn't have any powers, but it is suspicious that she's working in a mansion for nothing in return. Later, our protagonist would confront her again, seeking an answer to why she's working for free. To this, Lily responds that it's still too early for him to know the reason behind it. During the night, Yuri dreams that his dark-haired beauty is actually a witch and that she's doing something to his food. After the nightmare, the boy sees the girl in the kitchen. He suspects potion making. He questions his maid. Lilith jokes it's a love potion, but she was just learning recipes, not a witch, just dedicated. However, at that moment, the protagonist remembers what he observed during the night and confronts his maid about preparing potions, suspecting that the food might have something in it. Lilith jokingly tells him that what he's being served is actually a love potion, which Yuri takes very seriously. He then says that's probably why he can't stop dreaming about her, since ever since the waifu arrived he hasn't stopped watching her. But nah, all she was doing was learning from a recipe book to make better dishes, so she's not a witch, she's just someone who's really dedicated to the mansion. After this incident, the protagonist notices something strange that he hadn't paid attention to until now, which is that Lilith always calls him by his name. He comments that it doesn't make sense, since calling someone by their name is something only loving couples do, using his parents as an example. In response to this, the little toast looks a bit embarrassed, as if she's been caught doing something. On his part, the protagonist finds that very strange since she seemed to know everything about him, but he knows nothing about her. He thinks it might be a trick to sell his personal information, so he decides to go to the house's library to find her resume and learn more about her. At dinner, Yuri notices that his maid has stopped calling him by his name, since to do that, they need to have a certain closeness. The blonde would respond that they don't know each other at all, and that's why they can't have such a close relationship, but he'd be more than happy to listen to everything Lilith has to say about herself, so they can become more intimate, a proposal that makes the girl very happy. Later that night, we see that Lilith, for some reason, is lovingly holding a photo of the young master, looking at it with a lot of affection. Next, we're taken to a little flashback where the maid receives a letter informing her about the death of Yuri's parents. Upon reading it, she sets off on a long journey to the mansion as soon as possible with the intention of taking care of him. As the days go by, our protagonist shares that he has finally gotten used to having Lit there with him, although his suspicions haven't faded yet. He notices that new clothes keep appearing in his house, which makes him think that maybe the maid is trying to win his affection by giving him gifts. Yuri confronts the dark-haired girl, telling her what he thinks, to which she responds that that's part of her plan, doing her thing through gifts. In response to this, he has no choice but to turn the situation around, saying that the one who will end up being with the other is actually her, which makes the girl blush a lot. After this, it's time to focus on studies, and our protagonist is quite dedicated to this. However, he can't help but notice that Lady keeps coming into the room, interrupting his studies, even though she just wants to make him feel more comfortable. But the problem is that the girl feels lonely, and Yuri has the brilliant idea of asking her to stay by his side during his studies. However, after a while, the girl leaves and doesn't come back. This piques our protagonist's curiosity, who now feeling lonely, goes out in search of her. Upon seeing her, he notices that Lid is acting a bit strange, so he decides to follow her and finds out that her suspicious behavior is just because she was meeting up to play with a stray kitten. Noticing his presence, Maid tells Yuri to come closer, but he won't do it because he's a bit scared of cats. Faced with the idea of overcoming his fears, the young master decides to stay alone with the animal to try to get closer to it, although his efforts aren't enough. After a while, Lily would return with the brilliant idea of leaving food for our protagonist to feed the kitten so he could get closer to it. In the middle of this, a new cat arrives, much uglier and more intimidating than the previous one, capable of scaring both the young master and the cat alike. The boy notices how the cat seems to be defending him from the intruder, so he decides to muster up the courage to stand up and protect his new friend, successfully scaring off the huge cat. After this, they would become good friends, and Lilith, seeing this, would feel a bit jealous because the protagonist is petting the cat and not her, although later he would give her a little bit of affection like a charming kid. As she leaves the place, the girl accidentally drops the photo of Yuri that she was carrying, which he notices and later uses to confront the maid. However, the girl just responds that she carries it with her, so she doesn't miss him too much. In response to this, the young master would say that he doesn't need a photo because he can see her in person whenever he wants, embarrassing the maid. However, after thinking about it for a few seconds, he considers that the photo could actually be something to bind them together. After this incident, it was time to eat, and the protagonist felt extremely happy thanks to the food, so he decides to ask Lilith to teach him how to cook, telling her that he really likes her cooking and that she would make excellent material to be his wife in the future. After the cooking classes, it turns out that Yuri's dish, despite having followed all the steps and advice, doesn't taste as good as the dishes prepared by his maid. The reason it doesn't taste as good is that it lacked the most important ingredient, love. The protagonist realizes that his cooking is inferior because it lacks a bit of love, but he's also surprised to understand Lily's feelings, recognizing that everything she does turns out perfect because she does it with feminine affection. After this sweet moment, it was time for a bath. And then to sleep. However, Yuri felt curious about what his maid does during the nights when she doesn't go to bed early, while he plans to stay with her during her nighttime routine. The truth is that being a child, he can't stay up past 10, so he ended up drooling on his pillow. Then the day comes for classes, and our buddy is seen off by Lilith at the door, who would love to accompany him all the way to his school, although that would be asking too much from him. And so, Yuri would leave, and we now move to the school, where a girl named Tsukasa would be watching the young master, intrigued by his situation. The sad tragedy of what happened has reached the ears of his classmates, and they murmur and wonder how he will manage to pay for school now. Tsukasa would try by all means to get closer to the protagonist to comfort him for his loss and help him in any way possible, since she is the daughter of some family friends. However, due to her shyness and Yuri's cold attitude, it's very difficult for her to approach him at the end of the day. Lilith would make her presence known at the entrance, being someone who would attract a lot of attention. This angers Yuri because he didn't want his maid to pick him up. He doesn't want to share such beauty with the rest of the world. But while he was explaining his reasons for being a jealous type, Tsukasa was listening to the whole conversation from behind a tree, thinking that the couple she was watching was in a forbidden relationship. Just as her moment of shipping was about to happen, she was interrupted by her butler named Fuyusaki. Lily noticed the pair behind the trees and approached to thank the girl for being friends with her master, and also to greet her butler, as it seems they both know each other from the past. After a brief conversation, we find ourselves at the protagonist's house, where he notices that everything is perfect as always. However, Lilith has disappeared. What happened was that the girl left the mansion for a little while, forgetting her phone, and Yuri would start looking for her all over the place, hoping to find her. However, as expected, he would find the house empty. So now it's time to do what anyone would do when they have the house to themselves, eat candy and read a bunch of comics. On her part, Lily was trying to find a specific fish for dinner at the market, but since it wasn't the right season, it would be very difficult for her to find it. The sunset would arrive, and life only turned out to be fun for a little while, as Yuri now wondered where his Mai was. He tried calling her on the phone, but of course no one answered, so he had to feel lonely. Meanwhile, the dark-haired girl, once she finds the ingredients she wanted, would try to get home as quickly as possible upon realizing she doesn't have her phone with her. Luckily, she runs into Fujisaki, who offers to drive her back to the mansion. Upon entering the mansion, Lilith finds Yuri crying because he thinks she has put a curse on him, making it so he can't live without her. His sadness over her absence is overwhelming, and that's how Lamai promises that she will never leave without telling him first. Days go by, and now we see a new invader in the mansion. Clearly, despite all the time they've been living together, the blonde still doesn't trust his beautiful maid. So, she decides to turn the tables, becoming the one who watches over him and follows him everywhere. All of this makes the protagonist uncomfortable, as he thinks it's a plan to find out his weak points. So, as soon as he gets the chance, he tries to escape from Lilith, causing her to trip while trying to catch him and fall on top of him. As a result of all this, to prevent any more accidents from happening, Yuri decides that he won't take his eyes off her. Sumai then asks him if watching her for so long wouldn't be boring, or rather, if seeing her every day hasn't become monotonous. To which the young blonde would respond that he could never get bored. Really? What a stunning beauty! Despite these words, it's clear that our protagonist still doesn't trust Lilith, so from that point on, the girl tries to get closer to him, only creating more distrust. In the end, their best plan to get to know each other and become closer is to play together, and the game they'll spend time on is chess. There, Yuri would take advantage of the moment to open up a bit and talk about his past. When he was a little younger, his father taught him how to play chess, and the flashback showed that his parents had a lovely relationship. Lilith realizes that chess is important to him, as he shares that he never got to play as much with his dad as he would have liked. So, she offers to play with him as many times as he wants, whenever he wants, not expecting that they would spend the whole afternoon playing. The next day, we see Yuri with a strange attitude. Returning from school, Lily notices the change in attitude and tries to prepare a dessert for the protagonist to cheer him up. However, he takes it quite coldly. Later, he would notice other changes in her attitude, such as the absence of constant suspicion towards her or the fact that she ignored him. Later, we would see that this change in attitude was due to a notice from the school, as classes would be open to the tutors, parents, or servants of the students. As you can imagine, since our protagonist no longer has parents, he wanted to invite Lali to come see him, but asking her something like that had him deep in thought, since she is the only person he has left in this world. Once this was clarified, and the day of the open class arrived, Lamai would dress in an elegant butler suit that Fujisaki had lent her. Our protagonist would be sad throughout the class until he noticed Lilith in the middle of the crowd watching him. So, at the end of the day, they would both head home together, and Yuri would thank her for being there. The next day, Yuri would be running around, and the reason would soon be the sports festival, and he needed to train so he wouldn't embarrass himself at the event. He also wanted his maid to come watch him, but at the same time, he didn't want her to come because he didn't want her beauty to attract attention from others. The next day after school, our protagonist would be picked up by Lily, where they would exchange sweet words. This would be seen by her family, who later tells Fujisaki that she should act a bit cuter towards her, to which she responds that if her way of being isn't enough for her, although the tone she uses seems to leave the girl quite enchanted. Back at home, we see that it's time to start a training regimen to compete in the sports festival without any issues. This is how Yuri would start his training, but since he wasn't used to physical activity, everything turned out to be quite difficult. However, as the days went by and with Lilith's massages, our protagonist would gradually improve in his training. And now we change scenes as we see Tsukasa acting sad in front of her maid, telling her that her parents won't be coming to see her and that she wishes someone would go in their place. Fujisaki would gladly accept to go see her the next day, although she would soon realize that her sadness was fake, as she wasn't actually sad, she just wanted to be pampered by her. On festival day, the protagonist finds Lilith making lunch. He tells her to dress comfortably. At the festival, kids try to intimidate Yuri, but he promises to impress them. Lilith supports him, offering a reward for winning tug of war. Tsukasa helps, hoping for a sensual prize, but the reward is just a smile. At the start of the school festival, we see some kids trying to intimidate Yuri, but he's not willing to let them get to him that easily, and promises to impress them during the competitions. Lilith would be there supporting her dear young master, and to make things more interesting, she offers him a reward if he wins the first event, which would be tug of war. Tsukasa, who overheard all of this, decided to support the protagonist so he could get his prize, thinking it would be something really sensual. However, after winning, the only thing he got was a little smile as a reward. After lunch, we would see the reason why Lilith was dressing so comfortably for the event, and that's because there would be a tutor race where the girl would be quite nervous, hoping not to mess anything up. Then the race starts, and after a few mishaps, the waifu manages to win the first event. However, this doesn't sit well with the protagonist's classmates, since the race was for tutors, and she isn't Yuri's relative at all. Given this, as expected, the child would come out and say that Lit is part of his family, and that is why she can participate as a relative of his. The classmates resign themselves to this declaration, and Lily wonders if that's true, as she doesn't really feel like part of his family. To this, our protagonist would respond that while he hasn't stopped suspecting her, he does consider her someone special and of course, part of his family, which makes the girl blush a lot. And that's how the sports festival would come to an end. Then we see a shopping day for Lilith, where unfortunately a heavy rain starts pouring down, leaving her completely soaked. Once at home, she would ask the protagonist to take a shower with her, but he would refuse, saying that those things are only for grown-ups and for people who are married. The next day, strange things would start happening in the house. And by strange, I mean the maid messing up her usual tasks, like putting salt in the tea or cleaning clumsily. After spying on her a bit, our protagonist discovers that the reason for her clumsiness is that the girl has caught a cold and has quite a fever. So, he would order Lily to rest until she recovers. However, she would oppose this because she is the only maid in the house, and if she doesn't do her job, no one else will. Plus, if she can't do it, she would end up getting fired. Yuri tells her that the first thing is to worry about herself, affirming that they would be together no matter the cold, which would calm the girl down so she could rest for a moment. After a refreshing nap, Lily would be back to her usual self, although our protagonist would start helping her with the household chores out of fear that she might relapse, which would be the perfect excuse to spend more time together. Later, we see that the protagonist realizes how revealing Mai's uniform is, and with this, he asks the girl if she isn't cold, showing off quite a bit of skin, to which Jay responds that that's the point, for his young master to understand the charms of a woman. However, since Yuri is too innocent, he ends up understanding something different in the conversation and covers his girl, thinking she was cold. And now, the Day of the Dead is coming, and both have been invited to a costume party at Tsukasa's house. To cut a long story short, they go to the party dressed as a wizard and a dragon. What a great reference, Kobayashi. And curiously, the party didn't feel like a party at all, since they were the only guests with a lot of food around. Maybe it was the perfect excuse to dress Fujisaki up as a beautiful princess. But what a stunning waifu. The next day, when the protagonist was coming back from school, he would notice something quite strange about Lilith. It seemed like she was hiding something from him, and on top of that, the food seemed to be missing the secret ingredient. Then, after much insistence, the girl couldn't hide it any longer. She had received a letter from her old mansion where they were asking her to return for what would be her last day serving Yuri. Our protagonist would get angry and argue that she can't just leave like that because he hasn't broken the curse that has him thinking about her. Besides, the maid had promised not to leave him alone, proclaiming herself as his only master. In light of these words, Lilith would reflect on the letter, only to end up throwing it in the trash, saying that she prefers to stay by her young master's side. The next day at school, our protagonist finds something strange, as in one class, through a project, he makes it clear that all he thinks about all day is his maid and his home. During recess, he would start asking her questions about it, coming to the conclusion that Yuri is in love with her. But since he's just a kid, he doesn't really understand what it means to be in love. This would leave Yuri deep in thought, so much so that he would ignore Lily for the rest of the day. The next day in class, Tsukasa would notice that her friend has been reading books about love, but nothing seems to clarify his thoughts. Because of this, the girl, being the gossip and romance fan that she is, decides to invite the protagonist to her house to teach him about love through the book she reads. And that's how the protagonist ends up at Tsukasa's house, taking in the incredible atmosphere there, which is why Lily isn't with him today. She thinks that if she saw an environment like this, she might prefer to work in a livelier mansion. He reassures her by saying that she has nothing to worry about, so it's clear that the maid looks quite happy with him. Once the moment to talk about romance arrived, her house was filled with a bunch of books that were clearly taken straight from Wattpad, so Fujisaki would have to confiscate them all. Back home, Yuri would be greeted by Lilith, and as he remembers that just being there makes him happy, they both smile warmly at each other. The next day, a new problem would hit the mansion. A teacher has assigned them to create a painting of something as it truly is. You can imagine our protagonist asking his maid to be sumptuous for the painting, saying he wanted to draw her as she really is. After failing to paint the maid as a French girl, Yuri would realize that his painting is unable to capture all the beauty that the girl possesses, so he would start over, staying up late in the process. Because of this, Lilith would tell him that he could put all his effort into the portrait, but that she would be in charge of helping him sleep afterward. So, as night fell, they both tried many methods to help the boy fall asleep, but nothing worked until he suggested the ultimate plan, that they both share the bed. That's how Yuri would say that he loves her, but he's scared of not knowing anything about her. In response, the maid would start singing a song by Kuna, which finally helps the protagonist fall asleep. The next day, he would wake up completely refreshed, and to make the day even better, he would have won an award for his excellent portrait. From the moment he hears that song, our protagonist unlocks a memory, and since that day, he hasn't stopped dreaming about a mysterious girl with long hair. Upon waking up, Lit would be there to prepare breakfast before changing and of course leaving since it's her day off and she had plans that seemed like a date. She buys some sweets and then goes to a cafe where she meets Fujisaki. There, they both talk a bit about their situations with their masters and how their work has changed them for the better, as the girl seemed like a total rebel until she started working at her house. They would end their meeting with a comment that it was about time the protagonist knew the whole truth, which would be overheard by him since the jealous guy followed his maid all the way to the cafe. Once back home, the protagonist would subtly welcome Lilith to ask her if there's anything important she needs to tell him. After having to confess the truth so he would understand what she meant, the maid admits that there is something she needs to explain, and that is that they already knew each other. Yuri, due to his dream, had realized that he had already met the girl in the past, but he couldn't remember everything, promising to recall it all even if she didn't want him to, as it seemed like she was hiding something more about when they first met. Trying to recover his memories, Yuri gives Lilith a small floral ring, as he vaguely remembers having done something like that in the past. But before he could delve deeper into those memories, it was time to go to school. At home, she asks about his relationship. He says they slept together, and she imagines. The key is, if they confessed feelings. Yuri says he doesn't understand. Itsukasa tells him to express his love. A whole scenario would be created. But the important thing is if both have already declared their feelings. Yuri says he doesn't understand what she means. And Itsukasa tells him that he should tell her how he feels, because he clearly loves her. So, at the end of school, our protagonist would run home at full speed to confess to Lilith. He expresses how much he loves her and everything he adores about her. But before he can get a response, they are interrupted by a maid named Natsume, whose goal is to take Lilith away. Once inside the mantilla, Natsume would explain that she is a maid from the mansion where Lily used to work, and she is the one who sent the letter requesting her return. The point of her visit is to take the waifu away, since living under the orders of a kid who doesn't pay her is bad for her. And she's right, he's literally paying her with professional experience, not even with pizza like at your job. In response, our protagonist tells her that he won't allow her to take his girl away because he is the master of the mansion and her boss, and he will do whatever it takes to keep his beloved. That's when Natsume decides to put him to the test to see if he's truly worthy of keeping such an amazing woman by his side. The first test is an educational one, with our protagonist having to explain what the theory of relativity is, which obviously an elementary school kid wouldn't know, and she didn't know it either. The next thing would be to see how they manage their finances, which really piques my curiosity because who knows how this kid gets by. Yuri admits that he doesn't have anything, but somehow he's saving money to buy a little gift for Smite. And before they could continue with the test, Natsume, angry at seeing how much they support each other, accidentally knocks a lamp to the floor in the room. Instead of getting upset, our protagonist worries about the girl, asking her if she got hurt, which embarrasses her a lot because it turns out the guy is quite attentive and chivalrous. But despite the kind gesture, Natsume remains convinced that staying in that place is not good at all, and she tells Lilith once again to leave the young man. To this, the waifu replies that she should respect her decision and that she also understands the reason why she is there, which is surely out of concern for her. That's when Yuri understands that there are several ways to express mob and points out that the orange-haired girl also has feelings for her waifu. Since she was exposed, she has no choice but to admit that she indeed cares for Lin and is very worried, but for now, she gives up on the idea of taking her back to the mansion, although she claims she will keep trying. The next day, our protagonist goes to school, and Natsume, who is still at the mansion, watches as the cinnamon-colored waifu manages to handle all the tasks by herself despite the place being quite large. When Yuri returns home, both girls blush at the sincerity of the boy as he rushes home at full speed just to see Lily, and well, Natsume can't believe that a kid is capable of saying such sweet things without any shame. During dinner, our protagonist doubts that the orange-haired girl is a maid, since even though she's wearing the uniform, he thinks she's a bit clueless when it comes to doing household chores. Offended by this, she decides to prove him wrong. We see that Natsume can't do anything right. In fact, she ends up soaking Lilith with a bucket of water by mistake. However, Lilith doesn't get angry. On the contrary, it brings back memories of when she used to work with her. Once in the shower, they talk about the waifu's true feelings she doesn't know how to say or express because she clearly seems to be in love with her young Namo. Then, a new day arrives. And now, our protagonist is at school being interrogated by his classmates about what has been happening lately. He gets the response that there are now more members in the mansion, making the girl think that her little classmate must be a dad by now. But after clarifying how things really are, the girl realizes that Natsume is actually her rival in love, and she feels intrigued to see how her favorite guy handles the situation. At the exit, Natsume was waiting at the door to pick up Yuri. Although seeing him with his family, she might think he was just an unfaithful dog. However, those thoughts would fade when she saw Fujisaki take her young Nama away. On the way back, our protagonist would ask her why she came to pick him up, to which she would reply that she has to return to her mansion and that it would be a good way to say goodbye to him. On the way, our protagonist would bump into some guys who were quite a bit older than him, who would blame him for causing a loaf of bread to fall from their hands. As expected, Yuri wouldn't take the blame for what happened, which almost escalated into a fight if it weren't for Natsume, who manages to intimidate the guys. After this, she would advise the boy to avoid dangerous situations, because while he was very brave, he was also quite reckless. After saving him, she promises to return the favor later, and that's how they both arrive at the mansion to discuss what kind of clothes would look best on Lilith, because that will be the gift that the protagonist gives her for Christmas. Also, Natsume decides to come up with a little plan to throw a surprise Christmas party for the girl, a plan that would involve Tsukasa. And so Christmas would arrive, with Natsume taking Lily shopping, while our protagonist pretended to be busy going to his friend's house. In reality, once both maids were no longer in the mansion, Tsukasa Fujisaki would arrive with the intention of decorating the mansion as festively as possible. The outing between the two girls ends up being quite fun, even though the orange feline isn't very good at chatting. Back home, Natsume would give Lilith a pen as a gift so she can write him letters from time to time now that she's going back to her mansion. Later, both girls would be dazzled by the Christmas decorations, and Natsume would notice that Lilith has suddenly disappeared, so she decides to go into the mansion, only to be surprised by everyone that the party is for her. It turns out that our protagonist was being a little gossip with his maid the night before because he doesn't think he can hide anything from her, so they decided to flip the surprise so that it would now be for Natsume. That's how everyone has a lovely evening until Tsukasa falls asleep, and Fujisaki decides to carry her home. Once the orange-haired girl is asleep, Yuri takes the opportunity to leave her a Christmas boot that he knitted himself, along with a letter thanking her for her visit. And so, after the holiday festivities, the house has been thoroughly cleaned, and our protagonist Natsume had gone out shopping, talking a bit about how she doesn't actually love the waifu in a sentimental way, because it seems she has feelings for her master. What a surprise! While those two were outside, a fancy car arrives at the mansion, and a man gets out to talk to Lilith, who was home alone. This man seems to be the former employer of both maids, and his only goal was to stop by and say hello because he was passing through. This is when we see Lilith's past, and the reason why she decided to work for free in the mansion. It turns out that the girl lost her parents when she was a child and ended up living in different unknown homes and with some relatives, eventually living in Yuri's parents' house, who offered her a warm home where she could stay as long as she wanted. There, she would meet Yuri, who would be fascinated by her eyes, which she didn't like because she thought people were afraid of them. That's how she decided to go to a service academy, so that after finishing her training, she could serve the family of our protagonist. However, the rest we already know. Her parents passed away in an accident. This made Lilith remember that boy, thinking that she didn't want him to be left alone like she was, so she went out in search of him to take care of him. Upon seeing the man, Yuri would jump in to mark her territory, saying that she wouldn't allow him to take Lily away from her side, even though that wasn't the man's intention. To calm the boy down, she would have to explain that he was just visiting, although he would end up taking nothing because he had been busy with work for many days. And so, dinner time would come, and the waifu would realize that they haven't had the mansion all to themselves for a while, wondering how she should act now that she knows her young master's feelings. That's how Lilith would suggest going out on a date, which would excite Yuri so much that she would accept without hesitation. So the next day, they would go for a little coffee and then head to our protagonist's parents' grave since he was scared to visit them alone, but now he has someone with him who makes it less scary. There, the waifu would also take the opportunity to say in front of her future in-law's grave that she would take good care of their future collagen. During the night, they both go to see the city lights. That's when Lilith asks what she means when she says she feels something for her, to which Yuri would reply that she's not sure yet, but she plans to figure it out over time as long as Lilith is by her side. For her part, Lamai would say that she doesn't know if she'll be able to reciprocate, but she's sure that she loves him a lot and of course, she sees a future with him, thus concluding the anime Saikia Totamai. I hope you enjoyed this video, and if you did, please give it a like and share it with all your friends. If you'd like to see any of my upcoming videos, don't forget to subscribe. I suggest you follow me on my social media so you can stay updated on my next videos. I'll leave the link in the description. With nothing more to say, I'll see you next time. Bye!